The first X-Men film was something of a risky proposition back in the day. You have to remember that this is before the big superhero boom in cinema, and up to this point comic book movies were kind of seen as, well, a little bit risky in terms of box office sales. And this accounts a lot for why the first X-Men film tries very hard to play it safe and make it as relatable and realistic to its audience as it possibly can, with a view to market itself more as the next Matrix rather than the next Batman and Robin. So the emphasis here is on dark leather suits, it's on cool visuals, and it tries to play down a lot of the more fantastical or fantasy-based comic book elements of the series. But nevertheless, this was aimed as a big summer blockbuster. And thanks to the fruitful relationship between Marvel and ToyBiz at this time, there was a toy line ready and waiting. And this is a very interesting wave of 6-inch action figures that we were given, because we can see here that ToyBiz were beginning to experiment with a new format for their toys. Up till now we'd had the very successful 5-inch scale, which were based purely on the comic books and had a lot of things like action features and things like that, but had very limited articulation. Now the scale is enlarged slightly to 6 inches, and there is a greater emphasis on detailing. And this would ultimately give way to more articulation, and we'd soon see lines like Marvel Legends being born. And so these first X-Men figures, much like the Spider-Man film figures, are sort of a halfway house between what ToyBiz had been doing and what they would do. And the line was very successful. They managed to produce virtually every character in the film and even quite a few variants. The film was a mega hit, so of course this would have helped toy sales, and so we start to see playsets and vehicles as well. And so today I'm going to take a look at what must be the centrepiece of this collection, which is of course the Blackbird or the X-Jet. So starting by looking at the packaging, we can see that it does of course have the standard X-Men movie branding associated with it, which is that sort of grey sort of Cerebro room effect in the background. And clearly they've opted for a photo of the X-Jet rather than going for, say, an illustration or a painted image. They've instead opted for the photograph of the actual vehicle itself to put on the packaging. And this was, and has remained, pretty much standard practice in the toy industry. On the reverse, we can see another photo of the X-Jet there, and we can see all the key points of interest and action features that it has. And on the right hand of the packaging, we can see only one other product that they're advertising, which in this case is Wolverine's X-Cycle. Which is a little bit surprising given how many figures are in this line. You'd think they would have used this as sort of free marketing space to show the lineup of those other figures. This is certainly something ToyBiz used to do in its other lines. So it's a shame that we can't see more here, because I always think that's quite a nice touch. And here it is, fully assembled and out of its packaging. Now the first thing to note about this is it's relatively simple paint applications, because there's not an awful lot going on here. It is moulded in a blue plastic for the most part, and that is all you get. There's no shading, there's no extra paint washes or paint applications to help make this pop a little bit more. That said, throughout the vehicle we can see it is peppered with this red plastic, and this acts as a nice contrast to the deep dark blue, and it's even more effective when it lights up. But overall, the look and feel of the vehicle is actually quite impressive. It's surprisingly weighty for a child's toy, and the visual of it is really quite striking. And whilst there isn't a lot of detailing in terms of there being lots of little pipes or grooves, nuts and bolts and things like that, the actual design is actually very nicely rendered and it's translated really well into a toy. Now the X-Jet is electronic, so it has lights and sounds, and when you open the cockpit, it makes this sound. And I have to say, this thing is blooming loud, like really deafeningly loud. And a lot of the sound effects will trigger every time you use one of the action features, so it can get a little irritating after a while. But as you can see, Wolverine, or indeed any of the figures in this line, can sit nice and comfortably in this cockpit. And one of the things I love about the cockpit is that it is spring-loaded, so it will just pop up by itself. It just needs that pressure from the finger there to release it, which I think is a nice touch. Now, it's worth pointing out that the interior of the cockpit is incredibly bland. There's no detail in here. There's just a red moulded seat, and that's it. There's not even an attempt to put stickers for a display panel or anything. Now, on the underneath of the vehicle, you will see that there are these extra little wings. Now, these just fold out on a swivel there to complete the look of being in flight, which is really kind of cool. And I have to say, I love all the varying jutting out sort of wings that this thing has, because it looks really, really cool. Now you'll notice there are legs, and there's also this handle that is tucked away inside the body of the plane, so you can pull that down so that you can use it for a flight simulation, or you can tuck it away and that triggers the release of the legs. Most of the time. ToyBiz deserve top marks for this design though, because having that handle there allows you to freely manipulate the Blackbird and recreate natural look in flight. And of course it also has a trigger there to fire the rockets as well, which is really very cool. Best of all, it doesn't compromise the design or the look of the plane, so if you want to have it on display you can tuck it inside and it still looks very presentable. Now you'll notice there are 2 buttons on the handle here. Each one triggers a different sound effect.
Atmospheric disturbance.
And of course the trigger fires the rockets, which also light up. And as we noticed before, when you slide the handle back up it does extend the legs, except when it doesn't, and you have to manipulate them down a little bit. Now this is a great idea, the only problem is, well, it doesn't really work. The weight of the Blackbird just crumbles the legs, which are very light plastic, so it doesn't really seem to ever hold them without forcing the legs back up into place. So I've never really been able to get the legs to work on this and get it to display as it should, sadly. So ToyBiz decided to go the extra mile and throw in an extra action feature for us. So you'll notice there is this strand of loose plastic that slides out of the top of the vehicle and triggers this sound effect.
Wolverine, release claw attack!
This of course has nothing to do with any of the films as far as I can remember, but it is a fun little extra feature which you can control through the top of that grabber there, which is kind of neat. So to give you a sense of scale, this is how it looks when you put one of the 6-inch figures next to it. As you can see, obviously it's not in an accurate scale. It would be a pretty small ship if it was, but this does still look pretty cool, and it is obviously quite a big size. This is quite a decent sized vehicle. And for anyone who's curious, yes, the X-Men 2 ToyBiz Wolverine figure also fits nice and easily into this cockpit and it looks pretty good. And for anyone who wants to see how this looks next to a modern Marvel Legends figure, here we can see Cyclops, and pleasingly, although the scale is obviously off, he still fits into the cockpit perfectly. So you can still use your modern Marvel Legends figures with this Blackbird if you wish. But before I wrap up, I thought it'd be fun to take a look at the Wolverine figure from this line. And I have to tip my hat to ToyBiz for being able to make this costume a lot more colourful and a lot more interesting than it appears on a film. You'll notice there's lots of different colours in here. We've got orange, we've got purple, and this works really well to offset the deep black that we see. And it is a very glossy figure as well. There's a nice sheen to this figure which makes it a very nice texture and definitely recreates that sense of it being more of a leather costume. And there's surprising little details on this figure, such as the straps and the little X icons. And surprisingly, I think the likeness is pretty decent. I actually think they've gone for a halfway house approach here, where it looks a little bit like Hugh Jackman and also a little bit like the comic book Wolverine, but maybe that's just me. And I think this marks the first time we see Wolverine with individual rubber claws as opposed to one solid plastic piece, which I remember thinking was really super cool when I was a kid, although over time the claws have become a bit mangled. Now the line was very heavy on its action features, so you can see there's a little grip on his back that if you push from side to side swings his arms up and down to create that furious rampaging slashing motion, which is actually quite effective for Wolverine. The articulation is pretty much what you'd expect from a ToyBiz figure from this time, with a couple of little surprises. So of course he does have a head swivel, his shoulders move up and down from side to side, of course he's got that action feature built in as well. He does have the single elbow joint there, bends at 90 degrees, but he also has a wrist swivel. So I think this is one of the first times we saw this. As I said there, obviously his poor claws have become quite mangled over the years, but this in itself marked something different and new. Of course, he's got the swivel at the waist, and he's got that swivel at the legs there that allow him to kick his legs out, and he's got the single jointed knee, but he also has hinged feet. So this is brand new as well. And so there you have it, a very quick overview of the X-Jet and that Wolverine figure. I have really strong, fun memories of playing with these. I still think the X-Jet actually stands up today, and works perfectly well with Marvel Legends figures. And for vintage collectors, you're not going to be disappointed by this. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.